Imagine you're standing in the sweltering heat of 1940s Alabama, traveling hundreds of miles to your brother's wedding. You are met with severe racism, only to later return donning a turban and adopting an accent. Suddenly, you're transformed from an oppressed black man to a South Asian Indian who is suddenly treated with some respect and courtesy. This was the reality of Reverend Jesse Roulet. His story was widely publicized and even included on the front page of the New York Times in November of 1947. Theodosius Lewis, a Harlem Renaissance writer and editor, pointed out the irony of Roulet's experiment in the Interracial Review. It highlighted the folly and the injustice of racial discrimination. See, it wasn't that long ago that the shade of your skin could dictate your entire life's trajectory. So many black and brown individuals had European features such as thin noses, lighter hair, lighter skin, or straightened hair would make the decision to pass themselves as white. And today we're going to talk about it. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so on my Buy Me Coffee Patreon page in the description below. But without further ado, let's get started. Racial passing occurs when a person who is classified as a member of a racial group is accepted or passes as a member of another racial group. Historically, the term was used primarily in the United States to describe a black or brown person of multiracial ancestry who assimilated into the white majority to escape legal and social conventions of racial discrimination. But it was never as simple as simply proclaiming your whiteness. It meant renouncing your heritage completely, breaking away from your family, your community, your cultural identity, all in exchange for opportunities that you could never sniff otherwise. Yet you will constantly live in fear that one day you would be exposed. Discovered, it could mean violence, legal trouble, and social ostracization. Stanford historian Allison Hobbs, who wrote Chosen Exile about racial passing, experienced this when she sat down with a chat with her aunt. During their conversation, Hobbs stumbled upon a revelation about a distant cousin that she had not met nor heard of. This cousin had made the decision to live as a white woman in California. Encouraged by her mother to do so, although she was black, her light skin allowed her to navigate society as a white woman. Her mother believed that leaving behind the Chicago South Side for the sun-soaked streets of Los Angeles would open doors that would be eternally closed to her as a black woman in California. Hobbs' cousin didn't just mingle unnoticed. She embraced her new identity with full conviction. She married a white man. She raised a family shrouded in the illusion of whiteness and meticulously erased every trace of her black heritage, even from her children. Carefully constructed reality seemed impervious until it was fractured by a distress call from her mother. Her father was dying, and she needed to say her goodbyes. Her response pierced through the facade. "I can't, Mama. I'm a white woman now." People who chose to step over racial lines for better opportunities came at a steep cost. You weren't just changing your appearance, it was a cultural exile. Now, let's step back to the antebellum South. For enslaved African Americans, passing as white was a rare but vital chance to escape the brutal grip of enslavement. Yet, while adopting a white identity offered greater opportunity and mobility, it also brought profound grief and isolation and loss of a community. An example of this is the children of Sally Hemings. Sally Hemings was the enslaved concubine of Thomas Jefferson. She was mostly white and the half-sister of Jefferson's wife, Martha Jefferson. 4 of her 6 children lived to adulthood. Jefferson allowed the 2 oldest children with Sally to quietly escape in 1822 instead of publicly freeing them, which would have required state permission. Jefferson formally freed the youngest 2 children, and 3 of 4 children would go on to blend into white society as they grew up, and their descendants would then pass as white in the post-emancipation world. Passing would shift dramatically. No longer a desperate bid for freedom, it becomes an option, a controversial one. After the initial promise of Reconstruction had faded and the grip of Jim Crow laws tightened, white supremacists from the Ku Klux Klan to paramilitary groups like the Red Shirts fought tooth and nail to maintain the racial hierarchy. Racism would continue to mutate, finding new and insidious forms to maintain white supremacy. Passing at the time offered a risky but sometimes liberating escape route, allowing you to flee the brutal hands of racism, but step into a life that was shrouded in secrecy and oftentimes isolation. As the late 19th, early 20th century ushered in sweeping waves of urbanization and the Great Migration, African Americans found themselves gravitating to bustling cities like Chicago and New York and Los Angeles. These urban hubs offered more than just economic opportunities. They presented a chance to reshape one's identity. In these cities, racial lines were often blurred, creating pockets of anonymity where intense scrutiny of heritage could be momentarily evaded. As enticing as this were, the act of white passing was still fraught with complexities as it demanded perpetual alertness and a continuous performance of an adopted identity and an ever-present anxiety of the possibility of exposure. The onset of the Great Depression and World War II added new layers to this narrative of racial identity. Economic devastation and the unified war front offered fleeting moments of racial camaraderie. However, the rigid structures of racial hierarchy would still remain firmly rooted. Once again, passing during these times often became a desperate means of survival, a precarious lifeline during overwhelming hardship. W.B. Du Bois eloquently captured this internal strife when he talked about the concept of the double consciousness. The double consciousness is this dual existence of living in a white society while staying connected to one's blackness. Du Bois would articulate this condition, stating that always looking at oneself through the eyes of a prejudiced white society. African Americans who passed for white also straddled two worlds: the constrained existence of the race that they were born into and the privileged yet perilous realm of performed whiteness. There also were instances of something that was called tactical passing or 9-to-5 passing, which allowed African Americans to momentarily cross the color lines for a specific purpose, such as securing a job, gaining education, travel restriction. This was vividly illustrated by writer Antoine Boyd, whose father passed for white to secure employment after the Louisiana Creole family relocated to Brooklyn during the pre-World War II era. James Weldon Johnson, in the autobiography of an ex-colored man, delved into this notion of selective passing. The protagonist ultimately expresses profound regret, likening surrender of his black identity for the guise of whiteness to the biblical Esau, trading his birthright for a mere bowl of porridge. This sentiment reflects a broader, enduring perspective that passing as white can be seen as rejection of one's heritage. Ironically, one of Johnson's proteges, Walter Francis White, mastered selective passing. He was born with blonde hair and blue eyes and light skin and moved through the racially hostile South almost unnoticed, gathering vital information about lynchings and hate crimes that would have been impossible otherwise. Journalist A.J. Bain wrote, White thought of himself as an enigma of a black man occupying a white body. Despite his appearance, Walter White grew up connected to an Atlanta black community, understanding the struggles. This allowed him to understand the struggles and aspirations, and his unique position allowed him to become a formidable force. As executive secretary of the NAACP, White's life and work highlighted the complex interplay of identity and activism during an era when racial boundaries were strictly enforced. Moving forward to the modern civil rights movement, this was a time of seismic shifts in the American landscape, bringing on profound changes to the struggle for racial equality. This powerful advocacy for racial pride and justice dramatically transformed perceptions surrounding the concept of passing as white. What was once seen as a necessary shield against rampant racism began to be scrutinized as a morally complex choice. For many, the act of passing started to be regarded as a form of betrayal, a denial of one's heritage amid the collective fight against injustice. Amid these dramatic upheavals. And as victories against institutional racism began to accumulate, this notion of passing prompted a deep reflection within the Black community. For countless individuals, embracing one's Black identity became an immense source of pride and solidarity, rendering the option of racial passing as counterproductive and increasingly obsolete. Today, in an increasingly multiracial society, the practice of passing illuminates the enduring struggles and triumphs of individuals navigating the landscape of race and identity. A fascinating phenomenon is reverse passing. It's been documented in various instances of racial misrepresentation where individuals obscure or alter their racial or ethnic background. A really popular example of this can be found in the 2008 film Tropic Thunder, in which Robert Downey Jr., who portrays a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Australian method actor, goes under plastic surgery to play an African-American soldier in a war film. It's also important to note that pop culture has begun to more deeply acknowledge and explore this phenomenon of passing. TV shows like Lovecraft Country and Law and Order, films like Passing, which is adapted from a Nella Larson's 1929 novel, examine these themes with unprecedented complexity and new depth. Moreover, the role of celebrities who can pass for white can shape public perceptions. When figures like Rashida Jones or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson openly discuss their heritage, they contribute a richer, more nuanced understanding of race. And these discussions highlight the privilege associated with lighter skin, but also underscore the experiences within those racial categories. However, it's vital to approach media portrayals and public discussions about white passing with some sensitivity. While representation fosters awareness, simplification of these narratives can bolster stereotypes. The legacy of those who pass as white is profound and complex, and reflecting on these narratives necessitates acknowledging the broader movements that have aimed to dismantle the very systems that made these choices necessary. From seismic shifts in racial attitudes during the civil rights movement to ongoing dialogue about race and identity, it is important to embrace one's heritage while continuing to challenge the norms that made racial passing necessity. And I strive for a future where authenticity and equality are not mere aspirations, but realities that we all share. Thank you. This has been One Mic Black History. I'm your host, Country Poor. This has been a story of racial passing. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at OneMicHistory.com. I like to all my subscribers. Without you, none of this could be possible. I love you all, and peace.